Ladies and gentlemen, the program will begin in 3 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the stage, the President and CEO of NAMIC, Shawnese Washington.
Woo! Good morning. Oh, wow, I love that energy. I hope you all enjoyed the Continental Breakfast, courtesy of Cox Communications. Oh, my God. I'm sure they would appreciate that. And for those of you that attended the mindfulness and meditation session, you should be feeling fed, centered, and ready for our National Town Hall. NAMIC's National Town Hall was implemented in 2020 during our first virtual conference, and it serves as a convening to address some critical issues around equity and social justice. In 2020, we highlighted race and relevancy in the workplace on the heels of the George Floyd murder, and in 2021, our focus was on corporate influence and social justice. Today, in partnership with ESPN and the Walt Disney Company, today's conversation will focus on diversity through a sports lens. And it is always nice when your past and present intersect. What do I mean? It is my great pleasure to introduce my sister and dear friend, award-winning commentator Angela Rye, whom I have known and watched her grow in her career from her days on Capitol Hill and now at ESPN. Please join me in giving a really warm welcome to Miss Angela Rye. Thank
you, sis.
To introduce the panel and get the conversation going.
Thank you. Thank you, sis. Thank you. It really has been a long time. Years go by quickly. How are you all doing this morning? Good. I know we got mood lighting and there was mindfulness, so I want you to stay woke as best you can. I know that's inflammatory these days. I just mean keep your eyes open. Thank you so much to Shanice for your opening remarks. I'm delighted to not only be here, but to support her as she continues to rise and set such a wonderful example for Black women like myself. Today we're talking about stories. They're a fundamental part of our human experience, and the sports world represents some of life's best stories. I know for me personally, my favorite documentary ever is about the Fab Five, and probably a second close is The Last Dance. Athletes resonate with people personally, and as we've seen many times over, sports can be a catalyst for change. They can shape our perspectives and be a uniting force. And how many of you all know we need some unity right now? I'll take that as an amen. Today, we will explore this topic in depth, and I'm so delighted to be joined by 5 esteemed panelists on this topic. First up, please welcome the chairman of ESPN and Sports Content for the Walt Disney Company, Jimmy Pitaro. Jimmy is charged with overseeing live sports programming, sports news, and original and non-scripted sports-related content, audio, digital, and social endeavors, plus all sports-related content for Disney's cable channels, ESPN Plus, and ABC. Sounds like he's a busy guy. Thank you for making the time, Jimmy.
Thank you, Angel.
Next, let's welcome Michèle Stephenson and Joe Brewster. Michèle and Joe are a husband and wife filmmaking team who founded Rada Studio in 2006 with the mission to think radically about storytelling and disrupt the imaginary in nonfiction spaces. And now a little housekeeping matter. So I'm gonna introduce folks and there's a little bio. So let's wait till the end of the bio to clap so they come up. Because they are like, oh, they want me out. Okay. Their next series will be an ESPN Films 30 for 30 short, I saw a little bit is good, play, a documentary that illustrates the connection between the safe spaces created through the games played by Black girls and the musical genres that define us as a nation. Next, hold your applause. Let's welcome Shima Oliaee. Shima is the co-creator of the 9-part series Dolly Parton's America. Hold one second, Shima, which received several national awards, including a George Foster Peabody Award. Her next series is an ESPN 30 for 30 podcast titled Pink Card, the story of the 40-year movement to lift the ban on women attending soccer games in Iran. Shima. Finally, certainly last but not least, we're joined by Gustavo Coletti, Senior Managing Producer with ESPN's Features Unit. Gustavo, hold on one second, Gustavo oversees combat sports and Spanish language features in addition to leading ESPN's Hispanic Heritage Month content plan. Gustavo, come up and get this warm applause. You know, we got it together. It's gonna be a smooth, easy discussion. Before we get started, I want you all to see some of the incredible work from these awesome panelists. Let's take a look.
Black girls are the earliest carriers of Black musical aesthetics. We, as people of African descent, don't always get to pass down our heritage. It's not in the schools. So who's gonna carry it?
1, 2, 3, 4, 6.
Black girls' hand clapping games are essentially folk culture. The music is not just entertainment, it carries memory. We've been hiding culture in these game songs. And if you lose the culture, you die.
Zainab is from Iran, just like my mom.
Okay.
Zainab today lives in exile. She tells me about her vivid memory of the first time she made it to the entrance of the stadium when she was 12 years old. At that moment, Zainab knew that following the players from the hotel to the stadium was not enough. Zainab, if you went back to Iran now, what would happen to you?
من فکر میکنم اعدامم میکنن.
Yeah, she says they'll probably hang her.
All of this for watching football.
For me, I feel like being an Afro-Latina didn't become very popular until let's say 3 or 4 years ago. Curly hair or straight hair or fairer skins, and I didn't look like that, you know what I mean? And you grow up and I'm like, well, I don't look Latina enough, so I don't really hang out with the Latino kids, but are the black kids gonna take me too? And then if I hang out with them, are they not gonna see me as Latina either? So it's definitely a struggle just, man, going back and forth and trying to find where I fit in.
My vision always that we're global citizens, don't put me in a box. So I'm Latino, and people think that because you're Latino, you're Mexican. Let me teach you, there's a whole world. Central America, South America is a huge continent. Don't put us in a box.
Wow. So Jimmy, I want to start with you because I'm sure there are some folks in the audience who are looking at that reel and saying, ESPN is doing that? Right? And so I think it's important for you to help to ground us in this conversation about why sports, when you consider diversity, equity, inclusion, the idea of unity right now, why ESPN and why sports through this particular lens?
So first off, it is really incredible to be here. It was great to be here yesterday. Today, the energy in this room is just off the charts great, and it really does fill me with optimism, hope. It's just an honor to be a part of this, and thank you all for being here and listening to us for an hour today. Let me start by, well, how much time do we have here? Because that's a really good question. I'll start by saying that the obvious. Sports is a meritocracy. It's one of the things that I really love about sports. Sports has been such a huge part of my life, both playing and now working in the industry. And just, sports is all about performance, ability. It's about character. And I've always just felt privileged to be a part of the industry. When I think back to the days where I played, people ask me, what do you miss? And I usually say one word, which is the huddle. I miss being a part of the huddle. I miss standing there and looking at the eyes of my teammates. These are guys that were in full pads in August, triple sessions, 95-degree heat, and just this feeling this bonding, this camaraderie, we're all in this together. Didn't matter skin color, race, ethnicity, religion, none of that mattered. It was all nonsense. And I try to bring that spirit to work every day. And I try to replicate that feeling that I had. It is really what I miss. Sports are they're just so fantastic. Again, I feel so privileged to be a part of this industry. And just in terms of leadership, you learn, I say this all the time, I learned more by being a part of team sports than I did from undergrad and law school combined. I'm sorry to all my professors from undergrad and law school, but all of the learnings, just in terms of leadership, in terms of focusing on the team, checking your ego at the door. Sports are just so important. I read a stat, Angela, recently, well, not so recently, this was a couple of years ago, right during the pandemic, that girls were quitting sports at 2x the pace of boys, young girls. And that's horrifying, right? If you look, someone gave me a stat recently that 94% of C-suite women had a background in team sports. That doesn't surprise me at all. I totally understand that. So we got to do better in terms of giving girls more incentive, figuring out what the problem is, why girls are leaving sports, and help them stick with it. Humility. again, I mentioned before, checking your ego at the door. One of the things I love about ESPN and the culture at ESPN, and by the way, I did not create this culture. I'm just a part of it, and I'm benefiting from it. But the culture at ESPN, you almost never hear someone use the word my or mine. It is always our. There's a very little tolerance for hierarchy. It's just this attitude, we're all in this together. And so I just love being a part of that. So yes, I'm a big fan of the sports industry, and I feel like ESPN we're certainly leading in many capacities, including diversity, equity, inclusion. We still got a lot of work to do. Let's be clear. We got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Jimmy. Michèle, speaking of the huddle, I think one thing that you see very clearly in play is this same kind of concept. We know playing some of these games growing up, it's really important that you don't miss your beat. You don't, do one of these when you're supposed to do one of these, right? Like it's also a kind of a team sport, but it's a different approach for ESPN. Why did you think that play would be a good fit for an ESPN feature?
By the way, I just asked her that exact question.
Well, we didn't plan this, and I was not trying to tee you up.
In the green room, just asked her that exact question.
Jimmy, we did not plan this. Tell them we did not plan this. Okay, thank you.
Well, I think for us it was a result of a long conversation with Adam Newhouse and talking about where can we, first of all, center Black women in the conversation and the influence of not just Black women's play, but the culture itself. And so through that conversation came about this book by Kira Gaunt called Play, the Games that Black Girls Play. And her approach, it's about sort of just disrupting the normative, which you were talking about, like looking at it differently from a different lens and looking at what play does. In the case of how Black girls play, we're going back to Africa. We're going back to the transatlantic slave trade. We're looking at the Black Atlantic and what sustained and continued and allowed first of all, our communities to resist, and how it is reflected also in sports. By looking at how we play, we also have a different lens on how sports is played today. And even thinking about some of our iconic sports figures who resisted, discrimination and oppression, it goes back to the roots of the way those games were played. And it's about community. One thing that comes out in our short is that the play that Black girls engage in are about preserving community, but understanding community from a non-hierarchical lens. This idea of huddle that you're talking about is how do you preserve it? How do you give voice to each of the people in the story, but also not only how you teach, but how you support while teaching as well. And we get into all of that part of gaining knowledge through support as a community. And that is really key to a lot of the voices that you hear in the story, in the film. So why? I think in some ways it's invisible but obvious at the same time in terms of the influence that people like Kira Gaunt and the women that we speak to in the film and what we've done growing up. And the thing about it as well, which we talk about often, is this idea of appropriation. And that when you see our contributions in their full self, it's very easy then to make those connections. And what we hope with the film is to really center Black girls and Black women and our influence in that sense.
Can I add to that?
Sure. I was coming to you next, Joe.
I know, but this is such an interesting topic. I was in Europe, and I was listening to the sounds of this cafe. Someone yelled, "Hey, what's up?" And I looked over, and it was a white guy from Iowa. And I'm thinking, oh, that sounded like South Central Los Angeles. And so the reality is America is been influenced by these games and these African sounds and music it impacts everything we do. And so what we're trying to do with this piece is drill down on that, see how these games, the way we move, you can see evidence of this culture, call and response, help me,
individuality within the collectivity, which we just discussed a little bit about, the idea that you're able to come in and you see it on the court. You know, individual expression within teamwork that allows people to really flourish, but with that support.
So when you think American, you have to understand those. If you understand those pillars of African culture, you can see how it is impacted every part of American society, and people think it's going away, but the reality is the keepers of that cultural, that movement, that community building that you'll find in almost every corporation are the games that Black girls play. That's a very exciting thing, and we never thought that ESPN would allow something like this.
Yeah. So Joe, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with this. I think, you know, in the day and age that we live in now, where just frankly, you know, I want to make sure we're all clear, where books are being, like Toni Morrison books, are being banned in schools. You all have found an incredible way to bring history into the living rooms of Americans that normally could turn away through play. And so I wanted to really understand if that was the intention or if you're like, oh, that's just an added benefit. We were a Trojan horse and didn't even know it.
Well, let me say this. We have a company, that's our intention. And so the power of narrative and disruptive narratives, right? It's not just about coloring characters Black or Latino. It's about complicating the question, like what is sport? Like how it's developed, who gets to participate. So we were basically made a very interesting documentary following our son looking at the educational system. And we get a call from ESPN and they say, well, you know, we want to work with you. Let's find you a project. So I don't think they went 5 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I think our discussions were very interesting because it was very clear what our mission is. So we don't want to tell a story where we color a character Black. We want to understand the importance of that character to the larger culture. And we came up with this idea. I think it came from Adam, but I think it came from a discussion of what we were really excited about. And I think that's the message that we want to give to you. The message is, this is hard, and the stories exist, and we have to figure out ways to uplift parts of American society that have never been imagined.
Well, I do want to highlight one thing. You talked about the history and the challenge that's happening now around critical race theory and what's taught in schools, that this hopefully will have an impact in schools as well in terms of not just centering Black women and Black girls in terms of pride, but also having us a better understanding of what our culture is. The fact is that we are in a battle of narratives. We're not in a battle of facts, you know, and it's the narratives that are going to win. So what are the dominant narratives that are we going to back as communities, as institutions that allow the shift in culture so that we can really make substantive change, whether it's at the legal end or the Supreme Court or other places, but we have to make that shift in culture, and it's about what is the narrative that we're going to support and push forward to help the next generation, you know, support the next generation to have the language to make, you know, the next step in our change.
Shima, thank you so much, Michèle. Shima, I want to come to you because something Michèle just talked about, which is the narratives within this country, right? We're also talking about you growing up as, Iranian woman, understanding these different issues related to this particular game of soccer.
Yeah.
But this is so timely because now the world is being exposed to another side of Iran with the recent murder of Mahsa Amini, right? And what this now can create in terms of helping people to understand the different struggles that you all experience, whether stateside or still there.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear more about why this podcast, and if, I mean, I guess you couldn't have had an inkling, but you know that these are ongoing struggles that have existed for some time. It's just highlighted by this particular murder, but it's been a problem for years.
Yeah, you know, a lot of my work is kind of centering like on a monolith, like something I think is true or that people kind of agree is true, and then like hijacking that story. And I had been doing a lot of reporting on Dolly Parton's America on working class women in the South, and I saw like, oh, the narrative I've been sold about this group of people reminds me so much of the narratives I was sold about Iranian women. And I realized that growing up in America, I believed that like horrible things do not happen to strong people. Mm-hmm. And I saw, you know, when I watched movies about the Middle East as a kid in Reno, Nevada, growing up, I thought that my parents' homeland was like a bunch of men screaming with like bushy eyebrows, and like, it's freaked me out. I didn't want anything to do with my culture. But then when I looked at my family, and especially my grandma and my aunt, I was like, these women are so strong, and they're the ones intimidating all the men in my family. And so they totally rule this household. And so you know, so I was very curious about what had happened. And the funny thing is that when I would ask my mom about her childhood in Iran, she came during the revolution in '79, which is having a mirrored moment right now in 2022. And she was a 19-year-old. She was protesting in the streets. She was the youngest kid in her family, and her parents were very worried for her. The university shut down and they sent her over to America. She met my dad in college. He had also been sent over. They thought each other was American. They were wrong. I joke with my mom, I'm like, Mom, you went across the world and you still ended up with an Iranian dude. Like, why? Anyway, and when I would ask her about her childhood, she would talk about soccer. Like, and she played on club teams for the last 40 years. And I just thought that was normal until I shared that with people, and they're like, that's not normal. And I started looking at sports stories around Iran, and also looking at the narrative of teen girls in Iran, which my mother was one, who had been kind of frozen in time. And I found this story of basically, which starts in '79, but it's 3 generations of women in Iran using the national stadium to basically thwart a dictator, which is all of these little points of resistance that they risked their lives for in the last 40 years. You see in the clips on Twitter today of teen girls like screaming in the streets, like playing hopscotch on a dictator's face, like a picture of it, like that attitude was built over 40 years. And what the women did when all of their rights were taken away in '79, women who had fought for the revolution, what they did was, when they were told that the National Soccer Stadium was no longer, it was no longer going to be accessible to them, and that happened in 1981, and that it had been renamed Azadi Stadium. Azadi means freedom. So the chant you hear today, Women, Life, Freedom, is like, they used to chant just freedom during '79, and then they renamed the stadium Freedom and said, you cannot enter it. And a group of women made it their mission to get into soccer games. And they used that battlefield, basically that stage, to broadcast the truth about their lives to the international media community. So it's a brilliant and kind of genius creative way of how do we get the word outside of what is really happening for Iranian women in the country. And so anyway, it's been such a journey. I'm really excited to share their punk rock stories in this series. And also, each episode really echoes into today. And I think even though everyone is clamoring around the news about what's happening in Iran today, I think the series really illuminates some of the depth of how this happened in a way no one is talking about. So I'm very appreciative that ESPN is helping, broadcast this story to the world.
Thank you, Shima. Gus, we were in the back talking, and speaking of another tipping point, I think all the media companies represented here were also impacted by what happened also on a global stage, but in Minnesota with the death of George Floyd in 2020. And that was a moment for you where you saw an opening to help Hispanic folks see where there may be a blind spot around racism, and how you've used this platform at ESPN to tackle that through Somos Afro-Latinos and some of the other programs that you've been involved with and producing. I'd love for you to highlight some of that and talk about why that's been so important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So when the George Floyd murder happened, and there were all these conversations, and the media was covering the protest, there were certain narratives that weren't necessarily highlighted. And us, as an industry that highlights the achievements of Black Latinos every single day, we felt like it was appropriate for us to also explore their struggles, of their experience of being Black and being Hispanic, right? The Latino community tends to say, well, that isn't our problem, that is the U.S.'s problem. And what I immediately spoke with one of my colleagues who's standing right there, Santa, and I said, there's something wrong here, we need to do something about this, because someone had heard me talk about this and said, Santa just said the same thing in another meeting. So I gave her a call, and within 24 hours, it was with Freddie and Oscar, and I don't know, it was like maybe 25 people rallying behind this idea of let's bring these stories to life. And there was an element that was really important for me, which was put a mirror in front of Hispanics and show that not only is racism part of our problem, we are, in many instances, the cause of the problem. One of the things that we would talk about often is nicknames, right? And it was so common in Latin culture to say, oh, mi negrita, right? Very endearing. But what does that mean for that person? What does that mean for a friend of mine, Hernan Gonzalez? He was nicknamed El Negro Gonzalez. And it was like, what does it feel like for him to be 30 years old and still be, given that nickname? So we wanted to sort of bring in voices from not just the U.S. Hispanic community, but voices from Latin America, from Uruguay, from Peru, from the Dominican Republic, and obviously from Venezuela, and stories in the U.S., to hear their stories and understand the common denominator. And hopefully, as you were saying earlier, that there's this Trojan horse, and it's funny because I think the same way. Whenever we can inject a history lesson, even like Somos Afro-Latinos has like a 4-minute little explainer on the history of slavery in Latin America. And I always say, someone's watching SportsCenter, you're waiting to see some highlights, and all of a sudden, this comes up, right? And I take a lot of pride in that, and I take, and I'm really grateful for Jimmy and the culture at ESPN that gives us that platform to be able to put those stories out there. So I don't think of myself as an advocacy, storyteller, but certainly there are stories that they're like thorns in me that whenever someone brings an idea or an idea happens, I'm really passionate about rallying behind it and hopefully change one mind. My wife is a professor, and I always tell her, you have so much more responsibility. If I don't make a deadline, we won't go to Black and say Gus failed, right? I say, if you impact one life or two, they'll be able to impact 3 or 4 and so forth. So if I can do that with one viewer, and I know we're all about numbers, but if we can do, just a few little minds, and those minds can then amplify that message, what a privilege it is to be able to be the catalyst of that.
I know of about 3 LA City Council members that probably need to watch that piece. Heard it here first, folks. So Jimmy, speaking of the, it's funny but not really. It's like one of those ha ha hell moments. Like yikes. But Jimmy, I want to come to you. Speaking of the numbers game that Gus just mentioned, you have quite a role here in trying to navigate ratings with relevance. You know, how you're judged in performance with what people need to see for the whole of America to be safe, to survive, and to be able to breathe. How do you navigate that really treacherous balance?
So first off, Shima, Joe, Michèle, I appreciate you all calling out ESPN. It's not about ESPN. It's about your stories and the importance of your stories. We are actually just happy to be the platform through which you can tell them. And yes, Angela, stories like the Chicago Bulls dynasty, The Last Dance, they're incredibly important. Those are right down the middle, high quality programming. We take a lot of pride in that. Equally important are the stories that are beyond just down the middle, stick and ball stories like the ones that we're talking about right now. And yeah, ratings are important. Of course, we're all in the business world, but there are other things that are important too. And by the way, when we can get both, fantastic. But we have a fantastic team behind the scenes, a diverse team. You know, you all just met Gus. You all know Freddie, who programs our networks. I see Marcia there in the front row on the film side. What's really important to us is that as we're evaluating these stories, I mean, we get pitched, I don't know, Marcia would know better than I do, but we get a lot of pitches every single week. I know I personally do. I can only imagine how many our team gets. And it's really important that we have the right people in the room evaluating, assessing. I mentioned yesterday during my opening remarks, Angela, we got to make sure that we have the right folks on the team and the right folks in the game. And so what we don't want to see at ESPN is a conference room filled with people that look like me. When I walk by conference rooms, I want to see diversity. I want to see the huddle. I want to see folks that can give various perspectives as we're evaluating all these opportunities. And we're getting there. We've made progress. Again, second time, we still have work to do. But we do take a lot of pride in our focus, our ability to tell these stories. Again, stories that they're connected to sports, but they're looked at through a social lens, through a cultural lens, through a political lens when it's connected to sports. And as I sit here right now and I look out at our slate of upcoming programming, I feel really good about it.
I love that. Michèle, I want to come to you about this particular story with play. I want to know what challenges you all experienced in kind of conveying the story, and as a result of those challenges and getting through them, because you all have finished, what do you hope the audience walks away with? What do you want them to learn?
So our biggest challenge was really a practical one, finding an editor. I have to say, who could really sort of, and I think that's sort of a whole industry-wide challenge. And with all of the content that there is out there, finding somebody with high quality who can really interpret and channel your vision, there's nothing better. It's kind of than being able to have somebody who can help execute that. So we kind of hopped around for a while, finding something, because knowing that we had this sort of vision in mind. And so once that sort of happened, I mean, there are all challenges in the edit room, of course. I think that molding the story was really transformative. It was really, really transformative. And for me, the biggest highlights really of and is sort of why I sort of do this work, is spending the time with the people doing the work, spending the time with someone like Kira Gaunt, and spending time with the two musicians who have kind of transformed hand games themselves. Jamila Woods, who's originally from Chicago, and Elena Pinderhughes, who is a flutist virtuoso who can trace back her training to the hand games that she played both at home and in community with her friends. And so I guess, you know, the biggest message for me is that somehow I'm my first audience in terms of looking at how stories are molded, and I feel such a sense of pride and beauty experiencing the film and making it and seeing it. And I think this idea of centering Black girls and Black women in the experience, I hope is something that, you know, becomes something that's sort of normal for people, and that this is sort of, the film is one step towards that for our whole society. So yeah, I think that for me it's us being able to just appreciate the lived experiences in that way.
Of that, Joe, do you want to add to that? What do you want the audience to walk away with after watching play?
Well, I wanted to answer my biggest challenge, but it's generally working with my wife, Michèle Stephenson.
Everybody's been, where are the editors?
and it's got a history, but the reality is, patriarchy is really not welcome in my household. And so I understand that I have a male point of view, and I've had to rein that in. It's made me a better father and a filmmaker. But what was that question again?
Well, I think we should give a round of applause for dismantling the patriarchy at home. Democratizing voices, it's just what you want. Maybe you want the audience to learn that it's time to dismantle the patriarchy.
Well, I've seen the film and a number of incarnations, and I want them to take away what I'm taking away. I'm beaming with pride with the contribution that my mom has made to this country. Yeah. And so I'll tell another quick story. I am a psychiatrist, and so I was working on a unit one day before I decided to switch to the narrative. And it was a guy who was having difficulty remembering his name. But the one thing he could remember is that your people have never made any contribution to this country. And I thought a lot about that. I wanted to, and it had a lot to do with my decision to stop working with people individually and work with my community. This is a story that some people in my community know, others don't. But the young girls that understand this, they will study harder, they will feel like they belong, and they will make this a better place. And if I can achieve that with a short film, I've died and gone to heaven.
I love that. Thank you, Joe. Shima, I want to come to you on a slightly different note. I do want to know from you what you want the audience to walk away with from this podcast series, but also several of the stories told are from anonymous sources. They could even be in danger. How did you ensure that they would feel safe enough to come forth, to tell you these stories, to be brave enough? I know you spoke already about the bravery of the women in your family, the boldness. Do you see some of those traits with some of the folks who you got to interview?
Yeah, I think the fact that even their meetings, they would have these weekly Monday meetings to kind of plan on how they would get into the stadium in all kinds of creative ways. They were already risking their lives in even doing what they were doing, especially before this moment. And the first girl, one of the main characters, her name is Sarah, that's not her real name. You know, she would have a very meticulous system of shutting down computer, like password protected, like phone. Every night she goes to sleep, she has a whole kind of assembly of like just turning everything off, making sure everything cannot be hacked into or opened if confiscated, because she doesn't know if someone will show up at her house and take everything in the middle of the night. You know, that was very scary. I remember there were moments where I couldn't reach her, and when I finally got a hold of her, I thought something happened to you. Like I thought they found you. It's really interesting because under a leadership built on fear, it's not clear what the rules are. So you can break the rules and get away with it, or you can break the rules and end up like Masa Amini, and your body is delivered to your parents and no one knows what happened because there was a few inches of your hair showing. And so with Sarah, like she's so bold, yet at the same time, like that boldness is coupled with kind of a jovial like energy about rebelling that doesn't quite know what will happen. So you sometimes feel safe and sometimes you should be very scared. I think building trust over time really helped. Like I started these stories 3.5 years ago. I started doing my interviews for the series. And I think sharing the story of my mom is what really melted her, because she saw that her mom kind of took her fate in Iran and just wanted to live quietly about it. And so she struggled with her mother too in Iran. So, and we were born the same year. Like, she's like I should have lived her life. I should have lived her life. And so we really bonded over like almost being like twin sisters in worlds apart. And yeah, I saw her. You know, I always think with people I interview, we all have natural bullshit detectors. Like, you know if someone is sincere or not, or wants to take your story and make a profit off of it. And I think that's been the benefit of like, we really trusted each other. She knew that I was really trying to bring her beauty and her genius to life and tell the truth about girls in Iran.
I love that. Gus, I want to come to you because there's an amazing slate that you're also responsible for with the features unit, and I'd love to know if you can give us any hints about what's coming.
Yeah, well actually today, since 1 o'clock in the morning, we have a crew traveling with a softball team, Las Amazonas, from Yucatan to Monterrey. We're embedding ourselves with their journey. It's a softball team of women from a village, from a native village in Mexico. I think they were profiled in the New York Times. We thought it was a fascinating story. They play softball with various limited equipment in traditional garment and barefoot. And we, obviously, when you come across a story like that, you're immediately intrigued by it. And the team is traveling from Yucatan to Monterrey for a tournament with other similar teams. And it is the first time that most of these women are leaving the village for more than 24 hours. And they decided that instead of flying, because they had to take several flights because they couldn't all fit in one plane, that they wanted to take the bus, because the joy of being part of this team was exploring the world, right? So we have a crew embedded with them to travel for 36 hours to Monterrey and see what it's like for them as they discover the rest of the country. So when will it come out? We don't know. I know that I called my boss a few weeks ago. I'm like, hey, do you think we can get this thing going? He said, let's do it, absolutely. So that is the type of story that makes me wake up in the morning and that I'm passionate about. So hopefully that comes to fruition soon.
Very good. And Jimmy, I'm gonna come to you to close us out. I'm asking you to tap back into that huddle. And as you do, what are you hearing from the folks who you lead with every day about ESPN and its direction for storytelling coming forward? We know how important sports is, and again, that connective tissue that it brings us to be able to bring these kinds of very impactful, in some instances, radical stories to life. So what's in the huddle?
So I have a weekly staff meeting. It's actually the highlight of my week. And it's very rare that a week will go by where we are not talking about what we're talking about right now. Both somewhat in the weeds where we're going through individual projects, but also at a more high level in terms of how we're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. And what I'm trying to say here is that we're practicing what we're preaching. Like, we're speaking about it, but we're also, when we're getting together as a leadership team, this was not just a moment in time. I know we've all said that can't be the case, but when we get together as a leadership group, we are making sure that we are focused and continuing this momentum. And one of the things I love is I'll have what we call skip level meetings. Where I'll meet with my direct reports, but I'll also meet with folks across the organization, which I also really embrace. And I love it when someone will get on my calendar, set up a one-on-one, and that person will weave into the conversation how they are doing within their group in terms of diversity, without me asking. And so when that happens, and it just happened last week where I was speaking with someone on the programming side, on the digital programming side, and he reserved the last 10 minutes of a 30-minute one-on-one to walk me through his efforts and his progress in terms of diversity. And so when that happens, I say to myself, we're doing something right here. Like, this is working, it's resonating, it's trickling down and throughout the organization. And yes, it's also showing up in our storytelling, as you can see on this stage right now. And as I mentioned before, I am pretty excited about what's on the docket and what's coming. By the way, if y'all have not seen the film that we did on the National Women's Soccer League, you really need to go check it out, just in terms of telling the tough stories, not shying away from the tough stories, making sure, again, that we have the right people that are telling these stories. So if you look at what we did for the month of June around the 50th anniversary of Title IX, we called it 50 for 50, but most important from my perspective is the stories that we focused on, that we're each, looking at equality in sports through a female lens. The folks who created that program, they were women, right? And so, yes, there were some men involved, but the folks who were leading the charge, the folks that were identifying the stories that we were going to tell during that month were women. And so, yes, we very much feel like we are in a good place right now. And as I look out at the slate, I'm super excited about the Colin Kaepernick story that we're going to be telling relatively soon, directed by Spike Lee, who we've partnered with. Spike produced The Captain, the Derek Jeter story. You should also check that out. But I'm pretty excited. Another thing that we take a ton of pride in, going back to my point before, Angela, about not everything being right down the middle. Why not us Southern Dance? So it's just, when I think about ESPN at its best, I think about three words: substance, heart, and humor. And when we're getting all three of those kind of connected as a part of a single program, we're getting it right. And Southern Dance, it's really a celebration of dance. When you think about ESPN, my children probably wouldn't think that we would be doing something like this, but we are. And to your point before, it's also working. It's resonating with our audience. And so that's when the angels start singing for me, when we're doing something right, substantively, qualitatively, and it's also resonating with the audience.
I love that. Well, thank you all so much for this panel today. It was a wonderful conversation. Jimmy, Michèle, Joe, Shima, Gus, thank you. And with that, we are going to depart, and you all don't have to wait for me to intro you out. We're good.
Things change. 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 Things change.
Oh yeah, what do you need?
Things change. Things change. Things change.
Hi. Hi. Hi, hi. Would all the ESPN employees and the filmmakers, all ESPN employees and filmmakers, if you can come over here, we're going to try to take a group photo. Hi. Could all of the ESPN employees and our filmmakers, our panelists, let's try to organize ourselves right here for a group photo. Marilina. All ESPN employees, if we can come over, let's try to do a group photo. Don't be shy.
All right.
Will you help me organize them? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try to.
Get them in. All of us?
Are you gonna jump in? You're gonna jump out.
Joe, you gotta go get a picture. I'll tell Michèle.